All right, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for joining for the Bidders Conference today. My name is Camille Watney. I'm a grants coordinator and COC lead at the Mayor's Office of Homeless Services, and we will jump right in. So my co-hosts today are Prema Nandi, the Chief of Policy and Partnership at MOHS, Deandra Pollard, the HAP Program Manager, as well as Donata Patrick, the Program Compliance Manager. Just a few items and reminders. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be posted on the MOHS grants page later today. All attendees, as I'm sure you've noticed already, are muted. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or type a note in the chat. That'll come directly to the co-hosts, and we'll either address it on the spot or reserve it for the end when we have designated time for Q&A. If there's anything else or project-related specifics, any questions, you can reach out to hspapplications@baltimorecity.gov. Today, we're going through a lot of the information that has been included in the RFP package and application questions that have been posted to the website, and going into a bit more detail on some of the updates and new additions to this year's application. We'll do a brief overview and then discuss eligibility for the CIFA process and RFP. We'll go more into project specifics, describe the review and selection process, and then do Q&A. So in general, we are primarily looking for projects that serve individuals and families who are currently experiencing homelessness, at risk of homelessness, and or living with HIV or AIDS. The CIFA process allows applicants to apply for a few different types of funding. We'll detail which funding types are included in this year's application. And so you can apply for specific projects and be matched with funding sources that best match those activities that you are proposing. And we are accepting new and renewal applications. Some types of projects are only accepting renewal, all are accepting new applicants. MOHS is the primary agency hosting the application process. We're a city agency receiving federal, state, and local funding with a mission to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-recurring in Baltimore City. We do work very closely with the Continuum of Care. This is a group of local stakeholders and organizations that coordinate resources and carry out responsibilities with Department of Housing and Urban Development, or HUD. And we work with them to review and vet and approve applications. All applications that we are soliciting, we are hoping that they align with the Baltimore City's action plan on ending homelessness. This has a number of strategies, primarily that, well, strategy one is to increase the supply of affordable housing in the city. Two, to create a more effective homeless response system. Three, to transform the shelter system. Four, to improve access to economic and employment opportunities. And five, to establish a race equity agenda. With this, our funding priorities are to reduce the length of time people experience homelessness, to increase exits and options to access permanent housing, and reduce returns to homelessness. These are the available funding sources that are included in the CIFA this year. The first five are the same as last year. You can see at the bottom, the general funds have been folded into the CIFA process this year. This is a new component. The funding sources are a blend of federal, state, and local sources. Just to note that in the column that says anticipated funding, this is not all available through the CIFA. Some is going directly to other sources. There's a more detailed breakdown included in the RFP. But this is where the funding is coming from in the CIFA this year. And just to note that if your agency has received general funds for programming in the past, that you do need to apply through the CFA this year. Reminders went out about that, and feel free to reach out to us with any questions. The timeline, February 8th, last week, the RFP and questions were released. Today is the Bidders Conference webinar. We're receiving applications until March 17th at 4 p.m. In April, we'll be issuing notice of conditional awards, and we're also we'll be hosting a grant kickoff meeting that goes into more detail on the funding sources, requirements, expectations, and guidelines. Projects need to start July 1st. This is the beginning of the grant term. Okay, I'm passing it off to my colleague Donata to speak about eligibility.
Thank you so much, Camilla. I appreciate it. So I'll be talking about eligibility and what we need to, what providers we're requiring our providers to submit for the eligibility for the CFA. Can I go to the next slide? All right, so minimum, you need to be a nonprofit, 501c3, tax exempt organization, or another city organization. You need to also be in good standing with the state of Maryland. So you basically need a certification of good standing, and that can be obtained through the Department of Taxation website, and it must be within 30 days of the application submission. We also need the last 2 years of financial reports in accordance with 2 CFR Part 200 Subpart F. You need to be a continuum of care member agency if applying as a renewal project. New applicants must become a COC, which is continuum of care member, if awarded. You must have an active SAMS registration and a valid DUNS number, which are kind of almost act like your provider's social security number, if you would think about it. So you need to have that. You must be able to start by July 1st. Project must be able to start by July 1st, 2023. And all grant terms are for a year. So it'd be from July 1st, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. So for a whole period of a year. All projects are eligible to apply for renewals annually, but it is not guaranteed. So next slide, please. All right, next, financial health and compliance, something that we all know about and I'm sure we are passionate about. So for the audits and accountant prepared financial statements, we're going to be a review of the findings, material weaknesses. So you be a review of cash flow and other sources of funding or support, a review of access to lines of credit. That information can be most notably found in your A133 or your single audit. For most organizations, if you receive over $750,000 annually, you do need to have that. So we would need that information submitted to us. Renewal projects, if there has been any sort of deobligation of funds, you've had timely invoicing and accuracy of your submissions, and also be judged off of monitoring findings that you might have had. So this slide is in regards to the type of insurance that you're going to need to have. So you need to have professional liability errors and omissions insurance with a minimum of $3 million as a policy. The workers' compensation coverage. You'll also need to have general commercial liability insurance with a minimum of $3 million. You need to have a business automobile liability insurance with a minimum of $1 million. And a fidelity coverage. So should something go wrong and we need to make reparations, that we have something so that we have that money to do so on your behalf. We also need cyber liability insurance with a minimum of $1 million. And so agencies that actually get awarded the contracts are required to purchase coverage and submit proof of coverage upon receiving the final contract with the city. So you don't have to have it to submit the application, but once you get notification that you are going to be awarded you need to go out and purchase it and provide it to us so that we can make sure that you answer this part of the eligibility requirements, please. Next slide. So eligibility, housing principles, the whole focus on just homeless services prevention and just in general is to make sure the focus is on moving residents to permanent housing, whether that be if they're in a rapid rehousing program, ensuring that the services that are provided are geared toward making sure that they're moving towards being self-sufficient so that they can eventually come off of rapid rehousing and be self-sufficient on their own, or if they're on the streets, getting them into a housing situation and then working them on their way to being self-sufficient. So the program must focus on quickly moving residents to permanent housing, and whatever the definition of permanent housing is, as it is different for each person. The program may not screen out clients for having little or no income, having an active history of having an active or history of substance abuse, having a criminal record, having a history of domestic violence. For example, lack of a protective order, a period of a separation from an abuser, or a law involvement issue. To do that is not having a housing first approach, which is what we are basing the award of our funding on. That's the first thing, is having a housing first approach. So you can't prohibit individuals because they have a lack of income, substance abuse, criminal record, domestic violence, or service of participation or progress. So you want to make sure that your application does make note that you're not doing those certain things. And then obviously, when you're actually carrying out the program, you're making sure that you're following up on those. So the Fair Act Housing Act of 1968, that ensures equal access to housing and guarantees equal opportunity without regard of race, color, national origin, religion, sex, familial status, including children under the age of 18 living with parents or legal custodians, pregnant women, and people securing custody of children under the age of 18 or disability. So we really want to make sure that we are making this as open as possible for individuals who need assistance. In addition to, the City of Baltimore ensures protected class status regardless of race, color, religion, national origin, ancestry, sex, marital status, physical or mental disability, sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. These programs are open to everyone. We want to make sure that we're doing the housing first approach and that we're making sure that we're trying to eliminate as many barriers as possible. So that's what we're asking for all of our providers to commit to doing. Right, so this one is faith-based. No discrimination in employment or service provision based off of religion. There's a separation between church and state, so we're firm on that one. As well as there's no requirements for the clients to participate in any religious activities or services to actually be a participant in the program. Coordinated access and entry. So coordinated access system allows participants to access the system once and then get matched to an appropriate housing or resource rather than applying to a multitude of projects separately. We're requiring any of the providers who are awarded to be part of this system. And so they're going to be receiving match requests from the system, meaning you're not going to be able just to have individuals apply directly to you to get into your program. You have people that are interested, they need to go through the coordinated access entry, because it's the use of the centralized and standardized processes for sheltered housing that make sure that everyone is being vetted and the eligibility that we need them to have, they have. Again, it is that special coordinated access for drop-ins and centers and transitional housings and street outreach that get us the inflow of clients that we have, that we're able to refer them to the various programs that we currently are doing and that we will continue to do in the future. Permanent housing programs must receive referrals through coordinated access. So again, you're not allowed to go and have individuals apply directly to your organization. They do need to come through the standardized process, which is coordinated access and entry that's started with the city of Baltimore here at MOHS. And then next, HMIS. HMIS is the system in which we collect data on the services and also assists us with matching the organization's efforts to the actual outcomes of the client. So for Baltimore, it is HMIS, and it's the centralized database, and it's called Client Track. It is required for all grantees. And again, it is the database used for data quality and performance management. And so if you are a recipient of the funds, you need to have someone who's capable of using HMIS and reporting. And the case managers who are working with clients are also going to have to be able to enter in their interactions. And those interactions should be showing movement, being whether the person is needing certain supports to stay housed, or if they're needing certain supports to get housed. It's those type of things that we want to see so that we can show the performance and the data quality of your programs. It's basically almost like a report card of how well you're doing with making homelessness for the city of Baltimore. We're in brief. That is all for my section, and I will pass it off to the next person. Thank you.
Thanks, Donata. This is Paroma. So I'll be going over the projects section of this presentation. So Camila, if you could go to the next slide. So you'll see here we have 7 different project types that are eligible projects, and there's more detail in the actual RFP about what activities are eligible under these project types, but I'll go into some brief details about each one. So we'll talk about street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, housing stabilization and homelessness prevention, housing and services for people living with HIV and AIDS, support services for permanent supportive housing, and transitional housing. You'll note that the last 2, those are only accepting renewals, so we won't be accepting any new project applications under those project types. The first 5 will be accepting new and renewal projects. And one important distinction to make, and we've had this mistake happen in past years, so I just want to clarify it, that if you are applying for multiple projects, you need to submit separate applications. Some of the questions we realize will be the same, but we need different project proposals for different projects. So again, if your agency is applying for street outreach and a rapid rehousing project, we need 2 distinct project applications and submissions. That means 2 applications, 2 budgets. The supporting documents should all be the same, so that could be submitted once. If you have questions on this, please ask us ahead of time. This, if we get a project and an application and it has multiple projects selected, it makes it really challenging for us to review the application, and it will not be eligible for funding. So just want to make sure that's clear. Okay, next slide. So street outreach. So within street outreach, these are some of the expectations and some of the things that we're looking for in the project proposal. Just note there are different eligible costs associated with outreach projects. So proposals should really focus on the cost of activities to locate, identify, and build relationships with unsheltered individuals and engage them for the purpose of providing the immediate support, interventions, and connections with homeless assistance programs and or any mainstream social service programs or housing programs. So within that, again, we're looking for activities related to engagement, case management, emergency health services, emergency mental health services, some types of transportation, services to special populations, and then also as we just recently went through the point in time count, the participation in special activities that include the point in time count. So just knowing that ahead of time. So again, these are the areas that we're looking for within the project proposal. Next slide. Sorry, emergency shelter. So going into a little bit of detail, again, similarly to street outreach, we're looking for project proposals that are focused on engaging folks living in a shelter, case management, support services that are going to help with their care coordination, any type of emergency health services to treat urgent needs, and mental health services that include crisis counseling, also some types of transportation, any services to special populations, and then again, participation in special activities that include the point in time count, and then specifically for emergency shelters, the participation in the housing inventory count. Go to the next slide. We'll go into a little bit more detail. So again, all of these activities, most of this is outlined again in more detail in the RFP, but under shelter, there are a number of different things that are eligible activities. So shelter operations can include overnight shelters, but it also can include day shelters that are operating like drop-in centers that are providing these essential services, case management, food, transportation. Some of the funds may also support vouchers for motels and hotels, but there are some specific, if you're requesting funds for that, there are some specific details on when you would allow, when we allow the purchase of a voucher. Usually that means there's no eligible spaces in an emergency shelter. Next slide. Again, just going over some of the components that we're looking for in emergency shelter, and we're going into a little bit more detail on this project type, since this is a large area that's funded under the SEPA, but projects must be low barrier to entry. The projects, although providing emergency shelter, the focus on the proposals that we're looking for is the exits of participants to permanent housing. So how emergency shelters are working with their participants, helping them navigate the system through the coordinated access system, obtaining the necessary documentation to ultimately exit to a permanent housing destination. Again, all emergency shelter projects, as Donata mentioned earlier, is one of the requirements is to participate through our coordinated entry system. And then additionally, we talk a little bit about the family shelter designation. So if you're applying for a project that's going to be considered a family shelter, it must accept all family compositions, regardless of sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, or age of any members of the family. So again, if you are applying for funding for a family shelter, it needs to be open to all those individuals. And then it must also adhere to the COMAR regulations. So Title 5, Subtitle 21 of shelters that are prohibited from involuntary separation of families. And again, that's part of the reason, if you're applying for a family shelter, you must be able to accept all family compositions. And then any project, again, applying for emergency shelter, and really any of these projects will need to coordinate with MOHS. If you're a project that's already operating, you will most likely have your standard policies and procedures, but to get funded under the SEPA, your policies and procedures will need to align with the larger communities' SOPs. Okay, so rapid rehousing. Again, this is a project type that's funded under multiple streams of funds. But what we're looking for is, again, that this is a permanent housing. This is considered a permanent housing intervention. And it's going to include, those project proposals are going to include these three key areas. So housing identification, rental and financial assistance, and then the support services, which could include like housing stability, case management, mediation, legal services, credit repair. But again, your projects should focus on that permanent housing destination, and there should be some detail on how your project will be using a progressive engagement model. So most recently, our COC has developed standards around rapid rehousing. So it'll be really, again, if you're a new project applying for rapid rehousing, a really key piece of this is to review those standards to make sure that your proposal matches what our community has envisioned as rapid rehousing here in Baltimore. Housing stabilization, also known as homelessness prevention, is another project type that's eligible under the SEPA. Again, similar to rapid rehousing, this is time limited assistance and support services to prevent a need to move into emergency shelter. It may also include relocation services. Again, the goals of this project is to really regain stability and connect clients to services and supports. Again, households must meet the criteria. So the big difference here between rapid rehousing and stabilization is that households must meet the criteria here under at risk of homelessness status and the lack of resources to obtain permanent housing and have annual income that does not exceed 30% of AMI. So again, this is really a prevention program. So again, if you're applying for this, I would also take a look at those rapid rehousing standards because there's a lot of similarities in what we're looking for in a prevention program as well. Next slide. Oh, sorry, I think I'm done. Okay, I'm going to pass it over to Deandra. And she's going to talk a little bit more about housing and services for people living with HIV and AIDS.
Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Next slide, please. So the housing services and for people with HIV and AIDS, we want all the projects aligned with the National HIV/AIDS strategy. Of course, there's 4 main priorities under the National HIV strategy: reduce new infections. We want to increase access to care and improve health outcomes. We also want to reduce HIV-related disparities and health inequities. And we want to achieve more coordinated national response to the HIV epidemic. Next slide, please. The components of the housing services for this population. So we have 2 forms of funding that we can use, which is good. We have our HOPWA, Housing Opportunities for Persons with HIV and AIDS, and then we have our state special fundings, of course, which of course is covered under our Ryan White supported funding. Short-term rent, mortgage, and utility assistance. This has a 52-week limit, but most of our project sponsors opt to just use it as a one-time only expense, but you do have up to 52 weeks to provide this assistance to your clients if they do have that need. We have support services. Of course, anything covered under support services could be one main component is, of course, case management. That's one of the big options that our providers use, case management services. Of course, that's a great need amongst our clients. Food services, if you have clients in need of food assistance. Another big one, employment assistance to get our clients back into the job workforce. We also have permanent housing placement. This is another support services type component that assists with move-in relocations. You can use these dollars to pay first month's rents for the tenants. You can use this for security deposits, application fees when they're trying to apply for housing. So this could be of a great benefit to the clients we serve. Next slide. Oh, okay. So I will go on mute for the next presenter.
Okay, so I think that's me. So I'm going to just talk a little bit about the support services for permanent and supportive housing. And again, we mentioned earlier that this is an activity that's only eligible for renewal applications, but we wanted to just quickly go over it here as well in the webinar. So again, this is for case management services only that link residents to support services such as job training, healthcare, budgeting, parenting skills, treatment, etc. And that these case management services are paired with that permanent supportive housing. Typically, these projects are already funded through a different funding source for their rental assistance aspect, but this is the support services that it's attached to. Next slide. And then transitional housing, which again is also only accepting renewal applications at this stage. There's been a push from HUD to reduce funds for transitional housing. So we only have some funding sources through the state to continue to fund TH for special populations. And we do need special permission from the state to use those funds for transitional housing. And that's why that's part of the reason why we're only accepting renewal projects at this time. But again, TH here is designed to meet more intensive service needs to increase housing stability. And these funds can be used for the case management support services and then the operations, also that TH project. And we expect here, within the projects that lengths of stay are typically between 90 days to 2 years. And again, these projects are really only for special populations. Next slide. All right, I'm going to pass it, I think, back to Camille to go over the review and selection process of the applications.
Great, thanks, Parma. Some key submission requirements. We're requesting that every applicant sends materials to hspapplications@baltimorecity.gov. There's no submission portal. It's an email-based submission. The application should include a cover sheet and narrative in PDF form, as well as project budget workbooks that are in Excel. Parma mentioned this earlier, but there are different budget templates for each type of project. So if you're applying for multiple project activities, please make sure that you have a separate application and budget for each. The budget workbooks, there's 3 tabs. The budgets should include clear description of each proposed eligible expense, projected personnel costs, if applicable, staff roles, qualifications. We're not asking for a separate Word document that is a budget narrative, but we're asking for narrative type information within the workbook document. You'll see on the right side, there's a column for description, and we're looking for detail there of the justification and how you calculated each proposed line item in the budget. Note that there's a list of supporting documents. Parma will provide a little bit more information on that shortly. There's a checklist in the RFP to make sure that you have all of the required supporting documents. We encourage and kindly ask you to use a clear naming convention as we start reviewing applications, just to make things a bit smoother. Something like your agency _ project name _ item, so that we're not missing anything that you've submitted and all of your materials are clearly labeled and can stay together for review. Parma, can you speak to this, please?
Yes, of course. So just to go over the supporting documents, there is a checklist within the application and the RFP. We've recently will be adding a couple additional documents to the required review and signatures for the final submission of your application. So you'll see those updates either later today or early tomorrow on the website. Again, there'll be some leniency if you miss this and you didn't see this ahead of time. But again, there's 2 additional policies that need to be reviewed before you submit your application. So there's a certification regarding lobbying, and then a record retention policy, which is also referenced again in the RFP, but again, we have a policy for you to review and sign. And then the application references a DUNS number. Again, if you're a renewal agency, you probably already know this, but for any new agencies, the federal government has changed that system. So recent changes from DUNS to a UEI number, which is a unique entity identifier, and similar to what Donata said earlier, it's basically your agency's social security number. It's so to receive any of these funds, you do need to make sure you have a UEI number. Again, the DUNS numbers should have all been updated to reflect this, but your agency, if you're unsure, you can go to sam.gov to take a look at this to make sure your agency has that UEI number, and if you don't, you can apply for that for free. So just make sure that you have done that before your application submission. And I'm going to pass it back.
Thank you. For review of proposals, there'll be 2 key steps before moving on to project scoring. Step 1 is a screen for application completedness. So a reminder that all applications must be submitted by 4 p.m. on March 17th to cover this timeliness component. Second component for application completedness is a thoroughness review. So all required documents and attachments must be received by this time. If there is a project that's missing an attachment, particularly the 2 new additions that Paroma just mentioned, we will notify your agency and you'll be allowed to submit information within a given time frame. We won't, however, be able to receive any revised materials related to the proposal. The second step is an eligibility review. This is where we'll be looking at activities and costs to determine their eligibility in accordance with each funding source and those requirements, as well as conducting a financial health risk assessment, particularly looking at the last 2 years of financial health statements. If the projects are past step 1 and 2, they'll move to project scoring phase, which will be conducted by a review panel. The panel will be comprised of both continuum of care stakeholders, including individuals with lived experience, as well as MOH staff. The scoring includes a few key components. We'll be examining the need and scope of the application, the approach and performance, the organizational capacity, so analyzing your agency's ability to carry out the proposed activities, elements of collaboration with other stakeholders in the city, the overall quality of the proposal. We'll also be looking at project compliance and performance outcomes for renewal applications, looking at past data and benchmarks that were set and whether or not they were attained. HMIS participation, coordinated access and coordinated entry if it's applicable, as well as fiscal reporting and timeliness and any previous monitoring results. Please note that any project that has significantly underspent previous awards may see a reduction in their award this year, regardless of the overall proposal score, particularly if there are not any interventions or changes in order to meet and fully utilize the budget this year. That is it for the planned content today. We welcome your questions and hopefully can address them here. We'll also be managing a list of any questions that we receive either via email or here that will be posted and updated on a document on the website. You can see the frequently asked or recently asked questions there. You can also reach out to us afterwards if you think of anything else. So you can add in the chat or raise your hand for any questions and we'll receive those now. If there are no questions, or if you are ready to hop off, just wanted to extend a thank you for joining us today. We look forward to learning more about your proposed projects and are available for anything else that comes up in the coming weeks. We'll stay on for a few minutes more if any questions come through. Okay, apologies. You should be able to unmute now. We did receive a question if MOHS affirms chosen families in alignment with the LGBT community.
I don't know where the hell I'm at, Dr. Linda Whitfield. I'm going the middle, your Edgewood, your house.
I'm sorry, Camille, what was the question?
The question is if, apologies. We received a question if MOHS affirms chosen families in alignment with the LGBT community.
Yeah, so in terms of like rapid rehousing placements, like the participant is able to indicate who their family, the family components are.
Okay, thanks, Parma. We received another one. Any previous projects funded by general funds, just confirming that they should complete an application.
Yes.
Yes.
Hey, everybody, it's Robin from University of Maryland. Just want to get clarification of one thing. So we usually apply for the section under for HOPWA or people living with HIV, and then we get some HOPWA funding and some state special funds. I heard you guys mention security deposits. That's not something we've ever put into our budget, but is that allowable? Is that allowable, I guess, under HOPWA or under state special funds, or don't worry about it, just ask for it and you guys will find where it will fit?
Hi, Robin, it's Deandra.
Hey, Deandra.
So security deposits are only eligible under your HOPWA budget.
Okay.
Yeah, so state special funds doesn't allow it.
Okay. And so that's our tighter budget. I was thinking about the email that got sent out today of whether we could use some funding for that, but okay.
Yeah, but another opportunity, if your clients are in need of hotel assistance, Robin, you can have that under your state special funds budget if you wanted to add that. That is eligible.
Okay. Yeah. I think the university would have a impossible time making those payments.
Okay, yes, but just when you complete your HOPWA budget, just add a permanent housing placement line and just indicate that you'd like to utilize it for security deposits.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Mhm.
Any other questions? Okay, I think we'll wrap up. As mentioned, we'll post a recording of this webinar hopefully later today. If any colleagues or partner agencies were not able to attend today and would like to watch this. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining, and we'll speak with you soon. Have a great rest of your day.